Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second KRT Talks. I'm still honored to be here, and it's going to be a fantastic show. But before we start, I'm going to hand you over to Wesley Jansen.
Yes, welcome all. Didn't do this the last time where we were supposed to do this, but yeah, we wanna thank all of our followers, all of the people who train with us, all of the participants in the sessions, and especially the true followers and likers, because without you guys, none of this can happen. Also, we want to thank all of the people in the back, the Marshall Way, Luke Optique, the Drew Experience, Webster's Media, One Kyokushin, and the Kyokushin Shuffle. Before we go and start and get the introduction of who our second KRTalks guest is, I just want to, Darren and myself and Carlton and the guest, just want to say a big thank you to all of you.
Thanks for all your efforts, guys.
Thanks, Wes, and a brilliant thank you to all the sponsors as well from ourselves. Now, the word legend could be thrown around quite loosely in Kyokushin, but the next guest I'm going to introduce fits that title perfectly. Not only was he Sosai's interpreter, he's an author, a content creator with his own YouTube channel, and while he was Uchi Deshi at Ombu with the great man and getting nuggets from his lips, he even had time to fit in a performance at the Sydney Royal Opera House. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the legend that is Shihan Cameron Quinn.
His resume is so long he fell asleep.
Well, we got someone else there for a second. Hello, lads.
Welcome. Welcome. It's great to have you.
It's a real honor. It really is a real honor and a real pleasure for a number of reasons. First of all, what you guys are doing with KRT is outstanding. I'm not happy with the channel. I don't actually like it because I can't wake up at 2 o'clock every morning to join in. I did it once and I was dead for the next 3 days. So, you know, and the other thing is, what I'm really excited about is to think that I'm actually following Jeff Wybrow, because he is the real legend and he is an unbelievably inspiring and down-to-earth karateka. You know, the problem, as you know, in the karate world, it's very easy to get your head caught in the clouds.
Yeah,
you need someone to pull your legs down and anchor you to the ground, and that's what I love about Jeff. Every interaction I've ever had with him has been fantastic.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and you know, I mean, it's great to have you on here. I don't think it's any less of a legend than Jeff, but it's very nice of you to say those words, and it means a lot to all of us, I'm sure.
Can I show you something?
Of course.
Yes, please.
You know, Jeff was very cool. He toured the world, and he did it in ways that will blow your mind. You know,
here we go.
He would get from London to South Africa and, you know, all over the world. The way he did it was just fantastic. And I was in South Africa for a training camp in a town called Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch is like 500 years old, and it's got one of the oldest universities in the world. I think the Stellenbosch Uni goes back to the 17th century. But anyway, I had a beautiful training camp there, and Jeff turned up. So I got to partner up with Jeff, and we trained together. And it was a real, genuinely enjoyable honor. But anyway, I grabbed this off the wall. That's
wicked.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that is cool.
Oh, that's lovely. Look
Jeff,
at how young you two. That's amazing.
What year was that?
I was just going to ask. Yeah.
Good question. I think around 2007, 8, 9, 10, around that time.
Nice.
I don't have it written on the photo. But yeah, so we had a lovely time together.
Yeah, it must have been great memories as well. And I've never been to South Africa, but it looks quite a nice place to go. So,
yeah. Are you a wine drinker?
I do like wine, yeah. I don't drink a lot of it, don't get me wrong, but I do like it.
I don't drink a lot either, but I anyway, Stellenbosch is a wine town, and there are vineyards everywhere. And so when we went, we stayed at a beautiful vineyard. And
so did you do any training out of interest, or was it
just those 3 picks?
we practiced a lot of break falls. Look, it's neither here nor there, but I don't drink wine. But the guys I was with, obviously they're not going to get out of control either, but they just absolutely love the wines. They were very impressed.
Oh,
so Cameron, so Shihan, I want to take you back to the beginning. Obviously, you live in a beautiful place called Tamborine Mountain on the Gold Coast of Australia. Can you take me right back to the beginning for you? Where did it all start for you, and what inspired you to go forward with Kyokushin?
Boy, look, I used to watch Tombae the Mist and the Eager Ninjas and a TV show called The Samurai. You might remember Carlton.
Yes.
It was because the other two weren't born at the time.
No, they weren't. They weren't. I know.
Sorry.
It was a fantastic samurai show, and I have recollections, and don't get me wrong, I'm just saying, when I was 6 years old, I used to make samurai swords, and I'd play with my friends playing with samurai swords. I had no idea what I was doing, but it was just like I wanted to be like Shintaro, And then growing up at the Gold Coast is one of the most stunningly beautiful, salubrious environments that any kid can grow up in. I mean, I think from about the age of 6 until 12, I had a permanent zinc cream sunblock stain on my face. Cheers. I mean, and I wasn't the only one. You go to class and there were 5 or 6 kids in the class who always had these zinc cream stains from the weekend, you see. And so I grew up enjoying that environment. But then in 1971, a Kyokushin dojo opened at the Gold Coast. And my mum, I have older sisters, so my mum took my sisters along, wanting them to learn some martial art for self-defense. They're becoming teenagers and they're pretty girls. And so every mum's nightmare is exactly that. So she took them along and I went along. Just, I'll come, anything to get out of homework. And anyway, we went and my sisters were completely not interested. Absolutely, they refused to get out of their chair. But I just was enthralled. So I jumped up the back of the class and eventually I got to know people, but I was just punching along and, and I was in love. It was just like love at first sight. So that's how I started. It was just a coincidence that my mum took my sisters and I tagged along.
Who was your teacher, or who was the teacher at that time? Because 1971, it's ages ago. Yeah.
Yes, and Frank Everett, his name was. Now Frank was the most incredibly enjoyable bloke. I mean, I gave a eulogy at his funeral, and some of the funny yarns. No one ever saw Frank sit down. He ran a gym, and he had the front counter, and he never sat down. He was like always, he was a ball of energy. He was a little bantamweight guy. And so at his funeral, they stood his coffin up.
That's wicked.
Tradition, he was 5'4". So I remember when I first started, I looked up at him and thought, if I train hard one day, I'll be as big as him. And he was, this tiny little guy, but he was an undefeated Golden Gloves boxing champion.
Nice.
Before he started karate. And in I don't know, England's probably the same, but amateurs weren't allowed to fight professionals. But in the military, there was no classification. So when he was in the military, he actually fought in the military championship and knocked out the Australian professional champion in his weight division. And he was undefeated. He hitchhiked around Australia from Perth to Sydney, Queensland, and even down to Tasmania. He hitchhiked around Australia when he was 14 years old, just to get an idea of Australia. And he was the most inspiring, uplifting instructor. He was just a sensational guy who really, understood how to get the best out of people. And some of the people that started with him and kept training with him, fantastic. It was just the one most wonderful environment. And Frank was I'll tell you a funny story about Frank. In those days on the Gold Coast, there were only 2 martial arts schools. There was a traditional jiu-jitsu school, and then Frank opened his school. And so the word was out. There were always, in the local newspaper, would have 4-page spreads all the time, because a journalist who worked there used to come and train at the dojo as well. So she would write these great articles, and
nice.
And when Bruce Lee came along, boy, oh boy, the line out the door was just sick. I didn't even know what Kyokushin was. To me, it was just a dojo, and it was just lucky that it was a Kyokushin dojo. And Frank used to enjoy going to the pub, and so the older blokes would go to the pub after training sometimes. Anyway, one day he's at the pub, and he was a muscular little guy who always wore tight little T-shirts and tight little shorts, because he ran a gym, and that was just his thing, in the 50s and 60s, that's how he was. And he's at the pub one day and he's chatting, and this big guy walks up and pushes him and said, "Yeah, I heard you're the local karate instructor." And Frank is just like typically goes, "That's right, buddies," big smile on his face. And he goes, "Well, how good's this karate stuff?" And he said, "Oh, well, we have a lot of fun when we train." And the guy said, "Come on, let's see how good you are." I said, "Frank," and Frank just looked at him and smiled. And the guy's thrown a punch, and Frank's ducked underneath him, come up behind and dacked him. And the guy had no undies on, so he's standing in the middle of the pub with his pants around his ankles and nothing on. And he spins around and looks at Frank, and Frank smiles and nods and says, "Your move, buddy."
Legendary.
It's a nice opener.
The whole pub erupts, and then Frank puts his hands out, and that guy actually sat down and spent the rest of the afternoon just getting on with Frank. And that's what Frank was like. He was just... He used to have a saying on the dojo that there are no strangers, just friends you haven't met yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thing, but that was Frank all over, So that's where I started. He actually started training with Kato Shigeo, who introduced Kyokushin to Australia for all intents and purposes, and he was Matsui's instructor. So Kato Shigeo, when he left Kyokushin, he started a kickboxing gym and trained some really good kickboxers as well.
So I have to ask you, Shihan, because I'm tingling, because this is the closest I can always get to greatness, is interviewing people like yourself. But please, can you tell me your young experience of when you obviously went to Japan, met the great Sosai? Please tell me about the original days. What was it like?
Look, I was 17 years old, and I have to admit, I was a fairly naive 17 years old,
Were we all?
Well, I mean, some people more so than others. And if there's a continuum of completely ignorant and completely worldly, I was way down here.
I think we might be twins.
It was just like life was just a party. I remember I used to be what's called a nipper, which is the junior lifesavers. In Australia, they have the surf lifesaving movement.
Okay.
Yes, and to develop youth, they started a thing called the nippers, which were junior lifesavers, and that started in '66, and I started with them in '66, and I just was enthusiastic. I was a quick runner. There were certain events that no one ever beat me in. It was just like I'd go, and I was one of those, if you have a football team and some player is really talented but really undisciplined, it's like there's a quote by a guy named Yogananda. He says, describing a certain person, describe them as he's like a mouthful of hot molasses. He's too hot to swallow and too sticky to spit out. And that's what I was like. Life was so much fun. And I remember once reading a newspaper spread. We had the state championships coming up, and there was this big spread, and it was talking about these kids from another city who were going to an athletic coach, and they were getting sprint training, and they were doing flexibility training. And I remember looking at it and thinking, what a waste of time. I just want to go out and play, And I couldn't work it out. So I was irresponsible like that. I just used to enjoy it, but the nippers were so much fun. So this is my attitude. Now, in grade 11, when I was 15, I decided I wanted to go to Japan and train with Masayama. Not knowing anything about, see, that was 1974. So even the world tournament hadn't started. So, and communication wasn't like it was. So we had no idea what Kyokushin full contact karate was like. I don't recall in those days even throwing a leg kick in the dojo. It was more point sparring, and we didn't have that exposure to Japan. It just wasn't the same. And so I was, in my ignorance, if you like, I just wanted to go to Japan and experience the Japanese culture and meet Masayama and train. So I started to work part-time on the weekends as a bellhop, a porter in a tourist hotel. And after a while, like, I saved as much as I could, but I realized that I'm going to be saving forever. I'll save for 20 years before I could afford to go and live in Japan for a year. So I thought about it, and I thought, how can I go and live in Japan for a year and get paid to do it? And
entrepreneurial.
Well, desperate.
Yeah.
Let's just call you a visionary.
Call you what you want. I was desperate. So anyway, I found this scholarship. It was the Rotary Club. You heard of Rotary International?
No.
They're a service club like Lions International, and these, and they really are contributors to society. They're made up of business people who donate time and money to build parks and projects and so on. And they had this exchange program. So I found out about it and I applied, and I got this scholarship to go and study in Japan for 1 year, all accommodation paid.
Nice.
Go to a Japanese school, all my meals paid. The only thing I had to pay for myself was training fees and the extra food. But the thing was, in 1976, that when I first went there, the exchange rate was 416 yen to $1.
Wow.
Now, to put it in perspective, now it's 75 yen to $1.
Wow.
So I used to train at Hombu, and on the way home, I'd stop at a place called Shakey's Pizza. Anyone who's ever been to Japan, they'll laugh because they all know Shakey's Pizza. It's probably saved the lives of many desperate karate people in Japan, because 500 yen for all you could eat.
How much?
How much?
500 yen.
500 yen. Oh, nice.
A bit more than $1. Then.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's $1.25. Like, that's it. And for an extra 100 yen, you could have all the drink you wanted as well. So I think they saw me walk in and they go, oh, here he is again, because I'd sit there and I just throw it down. But my experience at Hombu was that it was a really, really exciting time. I was naive. I had no idea of the system that I was walking into.
Yeah.
And I just turn up and I sign up, and I can remember when I'm signing up at Hombu, there's this, I couldn't speak Japanese yet, and there's movement all around and people are running, and then Sosai arrived. Back then he was called Kancho. So Kancho arrived, and it's like, I just stood there like this, and as he's walking in, he looks over and he goes, oh, welcome to my dojo. And he shook, and my legs went weak, and I shook his hand, and the perfect masculine handshake. Wow. You knew if he wanted, he could have squeezed your hand off.
Yeah.
But it was just gentlemanly. Okay,
Nice.
and it made me feel $1,000.
Oh, I bet.
And that's why I started training at Hombu.
Wow.
Yeah, I guess because you came from kind of a jovial situation in with Frank and the way that you enjoyed your life, I suppose the discipline and the focus that probably exists in Japan was maybe a big difference for you when you started training, maybe?
Yes and no. Yes, you're right, because Frank always made time to have fun and make sure everybody's happy.
Okay.
But training with Frank was always discipline. There's no doubt about it. He really did. When you're training, you're focused.
Right.
After training, before training, everyone was, happy. No one ever felt pressured to call Frank sensei. It was always Frankie. And when you understood, you'd call him sensei out of respect, but otherwise it was never a demand of his. So yeah, you're right, actually, that with that, Darren, it was discipline was there, but also the relaxation. But at Hombu, it's a different thing.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
The palpitations would start about 100 meters from the dojo, and then you'd walk in and you'd have to put everything down. You bow once, you bow twice, you walk in. The whole process of even getting ready for training was a course of disciplined steps that you had to follow.
Yeah.
What a difference! That's such a big difference between what happened at Frank's dojo and then at Humble. It's amazing that there's such a big difference in there. It's really cool to hear.
It's probably different in degree more than kind. It wasn't necessarily that different, other than it was more intense of the same thing, and it was a real education. It really gave me the background and the experience in the traditional way of doing things in Japan that later on became very important to me, because everybody needs that. Everybody needs to know the traditional way of doing things,
Yeah.
So Cameron, the question I want to ask, young 17-year-old man, full of pizza, you go into the Hombu. You've never seen this style outside of this Hombu. What hit you? What did you see? What was different? What was oh my days, I never knew you could do that. What was it?
You want to know the number one thing that hit me?
Go on.
Tuts Nakamura's roundhouse kick. He was still training at Hombu and teaching at Hombu then.
Wow.
He was one of the early teachers at Hombu.
Wow.
And of course, he had that lazy, beautiful, over-the-top roundhouse kick. And I'm at a dojo where everyone would pull kicks, So, bang. And all I remember was the secretary was a New Zealand girl named Christine Wildy, and she was really nice. Now, on reflection, I think she was a little bit worried for me. She's, what are you doing here? Do you realize what you're getting yourself in for? But anyway, she said, whatever happens, now I understand what she meant was, when you get knocked out, what she said was, whatever happens, just say us and keep going. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'm used to that. In the dojo, someone throws a good kick, I go, us. But it was a different degree. It was the same kick. The impact level was much higher. So,
again, the difference was, it was the same kick, but it was a bit more intense.
Yes. Kind. Anyway, I'm man, it's like, all I remember was Christine saying, whatever happens, get up and say us. So I just get up and say us. And so I spar again, but my neurological system is a little bit more tweaked now. I don't want to get a second time. The hand went from here to here. And then what happened is we're still sparring, still with Tatsu Nakamura, and the kick comes again, but I blocked it this time.
Good
So
man.
what happened? My own hand knocked me out. but it hit my nose, you see, and I got a blood nose, and I'm lying on the ground, and this time I still couldn't speak English, and I'm thinking, oh, thank gosh, they're actually showing a little bit of compassion. They're all running around, and they're going to look after me this time. The little 17-year-old boy feeling sorry for himself. And then finally it's like, you, get up, go. They didn't care about me. They just wanted to get my blood off the dojo floor. Stop your blood. No, they hate blood.
So you made my dojo dirty. What are you doing? Get out of here.
We really fight. Anyway, that was, his training was phenomenal. There was another guy as well. And I remember this one particular day. There was a brown belt there who was quite a bully. Really, probably the worst bully I've ever seen in my Kyokushin career. And He was at Hombu. And this one day, he was given responsibility for taking the class. And you know how sometimes a student can be a really good student, you put them in a position of power and a switch goes off and all of a sudden they change. Well, this guy was like, he was beating up on people and he was beating up on the weak people. He wasn't particularly strong himself. He was a Hombu brown belt, so he's that level. But
and what grade were you at this time, Cameron?
The green belt, but I was told to put a white belt on and go back to the start. Nice. So you always had that choice. I know if I was older and stronger and more confident, maybe I would have kept my belt. What I found was, even though I went back to white belt, water finds its own level. So I found that whilst I was there, I did experience my green beltness, if you like. I was far more confident and more experienced than the other white belts, and they picked up on that as well.
Yeah.
This bully was like, just the way he was speaking to people, and he was trying to scare people, and he was scaring people. And then if you can imagine Hombu's like this, and then the doors over here, and the stairs going up to Sosai's office was passing. So anyway, as we're all training, there was this guy named Matsuda Senpai, Matsuda Toru. Matsuda Toru was probably the best kicker of his generation. He was phenomenal. He was even better than Tatsu Nakamura. In fact, he probably had a little bit to do with teaching Tatsu Nakamura. But anyway, he's just slowly walking up the stairs. And now, years later, when I thought about it, what he was doing was he could hear this guy. So he slowed down and he was walking up the stairs listening to what this guy was saying. And I saw him take 1, 2 steps up the stairs past Hombu, and he stopped and went back downstairs. And the next thing you know, he appears back up in his gi. He'd gone up in his work clothes. He was a businessman. He'd gone back down, come with his gi. And of course, when you see him, everyone had all sorts, and cowards, they kowtow. So when that brown belt saw him, he goes, "Oh, everybody, quick, stand up, show respects to Matsuda." And he goes, no, it's okay. Everybody, sit down. Oh, sit down. And he says to that guy, no, you're not going to sit down. You stand up. And it was, young me, it was the worst beating I've ever seen in my life. He beat this guy to the point where I was almost in tears. This guy, he made that guy walk around the dojo on all fours and apologize to everybody for the way he treated them. It was, I never saw that black belt come back again. The amazing thing about, it was a real lesson, but the amazing thing about Tatsuo Matsuda, if you can imagine, Toru Matsuda, Hombu had a mirror here and a mirror here, and they were good full-size mirrors. And this is what Matsuda was like. He's so funny. He's sparring away, and he's like a class above everybody else. Boom. And he'd maneuver his way to the mirror, right? And then just before he'd knock someone out with a roundhouse kick, he'd look at himself in the mirror and fix his hair. And as he'd knocked him out, he'd go.
I like that guy.
I was going to say, that sounds like Wes. That's so Wes.
He was so cool, but he was also, he'd, send shivers up your spine, because when he was angry, and he'd go looking for people. So they're some of the experiences. The other experience, my main teacher at Hombu through that time was Hiroshige Senpai.
Yeah,
he taught the greats, so many greats.
Yeah.
The great, most successful dojo.
And I actually had the pleasure to train with him a couple of years before he passed. So
that would have been such an honor.
Yeah, I feel really, really privileged and grateful to have had that, to be fair.
Yeah, I've got a great photo of him with me.
It was in his new dojo, though. I was hoping to go to the... I didn't realise he'd obviously moved dojo away from where you saw the likes of Yamaki, Garry, or Filio, and all of them people training.
Yeah. See, that's that photo there. This one here, or are we here?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
That's, I'm trying to, where are, look.
A little bit down. Yeah.
There you go.
Like this.
Hold it there. Hold it.
There you
Spot
go.
on. Spot on.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's,
wow.
Yeah, he was a great teacher. He had a very good way of teaching. He was only a brown belt, Uchi Deshi at the time.
Okay.
But we stayed good friends. And in actual fact, a number of years later, many years later, he sent his son to train with me for 5 years. His son came out and lived in Australia. At first he was living with me, but then he moved out. So he and another kid named Yusuke Fuji. You heard of Fuji Yusuke?
Yeah.
He came and lived with me and trained for 3 years. And they stayed at the dojo. And Hiroshige Senpai said all he could remember was how cool it was that this young 17-year-old kid turns up from some foreign country, can't speak a word of Japanese, and by the end of the year, he's interpreting for Sosai and got a handle on the culture and everything. So he said, when I have children, I'd like my oldest son to do the same thing. So that's when he sent...
nice.
Yeah, and
you made a really good impression on him as well, obviously, to have adopted the same format that you chose.
Well, yeah, it was. I just think it was just so fantastic. And his son, I caught up with his son just after he passed because I was in Japan with Uchi Shihan, and we were talking, and he said he knows that Hiroshige Senpai was a little ill at the time, and he said he wants to call him up. He said, but he said, I'm just not familiar with how to talk to people who aren't very well. So he was a bit uncomfortable calling him up. I said, no, call him up now. And I grabbed my phone and I dialed. And I said, here, look, talk to him right now. And this was on the Friday before the tournament. And they had a great old chat. And then he passed me the phone back. And I had a chat to Hiroshige Shihan. And I said, look, I'll be coming back to Tokyo. I'll come and see you on the Tuesday, I think it was. And, I went back, found my way to where he was staying, and I went there, took some flowers and everything, and they said, no, he's checked out and gone home. I said, oh, okay. So I said, oh, look, I've come from Australia. I brought these flowers. If he's checked out, that's a good thing. So can you give these flowers to someone you think might need them? And as I was walking away, the nurse rang up and said, look, actually, he ran up to me and said, look, we don't ever talk about it, but our standard practice is that when someone passes away, we never say that. We say that they've checked out to contact the family. But in actual fact, he died this morning. And so I'd missed him just by a few hours.
Oh, mate.
But yeah. No, died the day before, I think. So anyway, I contacted his wife, who'd come out, obviously, when her son came out at 15, she came out and stayed for a little while. And I found out where he was. And in Japan, they do like an open casket. And I went along, and it was very emotional. You know, he was a very good man. And so I paid my respects. And Kaneko was there. You know Kaneko, the guy that took over his organization?
Yeah, I've trained him.
He trained with him. Yeah, he trained with him.
He trained in Australia with me. And at one stage there, 17 of my students had gone and trained at his dojo for various lengths of time, for a month, 3 months, a year, 2 years, like this. And we had his dojo was the one that I would encourage my students to go and train at, because just like the way he trained and his attitude. And he was a student of Hiroshige Shihan. See?
Yeah, he's a fantastic instructor.
Yeah, so he was there, and I just paid my respects, and that was that. And you know, it was a really unfortunate timing thing, but we're so glad that we'd spoken to him on the phone, at least on the
a few days before that.
Yeah.
Well,
it's such a shame.
Cameron, just to elaborate on that to some degree, because it's very clear by just talking to you and listening to your history, you had a very lateral brain. You're a very courageous man. At 17, to go to Japan and, you know, and not know the language and learn it and pick it up so quick. Really, what I want to ask you is, what was the moment that Sosai realized and made you his interpreter? How did you integrate yourself into that fabric? Please tell me how it all came about.
Oh man, it's funny. I can picture it even right now. You know, and I've got this great
I can imagine that.
it's I had this photo in the old book. I've got the old version of the book here, and I had a photo of when I was living in Japan in 1985. I went over, I was working with the Australian government there, and there's that picture there.
Yeah, I've seen that one before.
Yes.
And in the new book, what I did is I added another picture, and I've got in the new book, that's me at 17.
In the office.
In the office.
Nice.
Today, Sosai asked me to be his interpreter, because what happened was I was training. I'd come for training. And before they would even let me train, they said, oh, Us also wants you to go up to the office. You know?
Yeah, but before you go there, how many, that wasn't an often thing, I think, that people get called up to Sosai's office, right? It's like, so when you get told that you'll be like, oh my God, what's going on here?
You said it. And it's like, I remember the first time I got called up to the office was when I just started training. And Sosai is, people need to understand how much of an alpha male, of the wise man that Sosai was. I was talking once to a gentleman who's a 9th Dan in Okinawan karate, and he said to me, people need to realize that if the average person is thinking 3 years ahead, Masayama was thinking 30 years ahead. Right. He really understood things, and he had a grasp on human nature. So he really knew how to make people feel important. So he would never have let this young kid train at his dojo without ever having given that kid the opportunity to come up and meet him and shake his hand. He understood it. You know, we used to have the old membership cards, and I can remember going up to his office, and he would have 200 of them on his table, and each one he'd very carefully sign his name. And he didn't have to, but he understood that
what it meant.
They still have that. They have that, look, this is my membership, and that's Masayama's original autograph. You know? Nice. I mean, things like that he didn't miss. So he invited me up to his office, and I'm standing at the office. They said, just stand at the door and say "Us" and wait. So I stand at the door, and I go, "Us," and he looks up and he drops his glasses, and I steadied myself on the door frame with my elbow. I literally felt like I was about to fall down. Uchi Shihan and the others talk about the power of his gaze. And the power of his gaze was so intense that he would literally melt people. But he had the opposite effect too. When he realized he could read people's nature, when he realized what had happened, he smiled and the energy changed, and I picked myself back up again, and he invited me in, and he pulled a chair up right next to him. This is why in that picture I'm sitting there next to him in his office, and he's looking at the calendar on the wall, and this was about late August, I think, and he's looking at the calendar, and I could see towards the end of September he had the 8th All Japan Championship coming up. And
wow, the 8th. Oh my days, that's wow.
It's crazy.
Wow.
It's crazy. Anyway, and it was all written in Japanese, and he didn't really know whether I could speak Japanese or not, but I'd been studying fairly conscientiously. Uncharacteristically of me, I was not a conscientious student at all, but
except for Japanese.
And as he's looking at it, he's looking at the date, and I read it out. I said, the All Japan Championship. And he looked at me, he said, you can read that in Japanese. I said, yeah. And he said, what are you doing that weekend? I said, well, I was going to come and watch. He said, can you come and be here? I'm having some foreign guests come, so I'll need an interpreter. So I said, yeah, sure. So there was Luke Hollander, Bobby Lowe. Bobby Lowe brought his sponsor, who was a Kyokushin sponsor named Clarence Fong. There was Yasuhiko Oyama, Shigeru Oyama. Shigeru Oyama brought some fighters. One guy was Clyde Coy. Clyde Coy.
Because Shigeru was at that time was already in America then.
Yeah, he'd been in America since,
yeah.
but he was still in Kyokushin. Clyde Coy, Joe Menino, and a guy named Eddie Frazier. And we got on like a house on fire. He was a black guy. He was African American. His name was Frazier, but my middle name's Frazier. So it's like, dude, we're brothers, you know. and so we got on really well. And then there was Miyuki Miura, and I knew these names, but I never met them. And then there was Peter Chong, and Ashihara was there, and a whole range of these people and Big Jacques Sandalescu and his wife Annie. And to this day, you know, Annie contributed to the book. She gave me some great material for the book, and we're still good mates today. So that was my first interpreting experience, and I have to say, my life is just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. I mean, to be there for the 8th All Japan and meet all these guys, and the effect that it had was just fantastic. Then the next year, Sosai came to Australia, and so they probably preferred that I didn't interpret for one reason or another. So they'd actually got this Japanese guy to interpret, and I was only a brown belt. I wasn't welcome into the black belt meeting. So anyway, I'm sitting outside in the restaurant in the hotel, chatting with my mate, Johnny Pappas, and we're going, I wonder how the meeting's going. Oh no, I think it was Johnny Pappas ran up and said, quick, Concho wants you. And Concho had asked, where's the young lad that came and trained in Japan last year? And so I ran up, and he goes, oh, come on. He gives me a hug, and he puts a chair right next to me, and he could tell I was still quite nervous, you know, because now I'm interpreting in front of my brothers from the dojos, you know, so let's see if all this talk really holds up. And Sosai very, very discreetly put his hand on my leg and just tapped my leg and said, it's okay, you know. And I just don't think he was working out with the Japanese interpreter, because the guy was an interpreter. He didn't understand karate, you see, and sometimes that can make a difference. So anyway, that was the next interpreting job was there in Australia like that. So anyway, that's basically where it all started.
Well, look, I'm only going to disagree with one thing, is that you said very humbly that you think you're a lucky man. I don't. I think you make your own luck. For example, luck would be you was born in Japan, fell into the dojo, met Sosai. No, you was born in Australia, found a way to get to Japan. Yeah. You are such a humble person, trained and become his interpreter. So that's the only thing I would disagree with. I don't think you're lucky. I think you made your own luck by being the fantastic person you are. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's complicated to say that, but I think there's a degree of luck involved as well.
Well,
but you have to be there.
I mean, you have to put yourself out there for that to happen. You have to, you know, and courageously you went and did that, you know, and as a naive kid, and then you know, discovered a lot of focus, a lot of discipline, and a lot of determination to actually learn and progress within Japanese, and you know, probably a harsh environment in some ways, you know. But I mean, when you mentioned about Sosai being like really warm and welcoming, I've spoken to a few people, Nicholas Pettas, Judd Reed, obviously Hanshi as well, and they've all said, you know, he was a very, very hard man, but he also understood a lot of other areas. And I think Nicholas Pettas always said that, you know, he kind of had maybe a little bit of a soft spot for the foreigners as well, because maybe he wanted to learn a little bit, and I don't know what his English was like.
I was going to ask that, because when you were sitting next to him the first time in the office and looking at the calendar, did he fully speak Japanese to you, or was it maybe a little bit of English, and do you understand and stuff like that?
I think he understood more English than people realized.
Yeah, that's my interpretation as well.
That's the same with Hanshi, by the way. That's a different story. Yeah.
What do you think? Hanshi speaks more English than people realize?
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm just going to say this. No, but the funny thing is, Hanshi is a South African, and he's really
Zimbabwe, not South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Northern Rhodesia, weren't it?
Yeah.
I think he come from.
Yeah. But in South Africa, they have a lot of in their language, a lot of the stuff they say look a lot like Holland and the Dutch language.
Yes.
So he surprised us a few times where people were talking in Dutch, and then he responded back to them, and they were like, "Oh," and he responded back to them in South African Dutch. But that was really funny because they blow your mind. Those.
I remember once I was interpreting for Sosai in America, I think, and it was going backwards and forwards, English, Japanese, English, Japanese. Then they asked a question, and I interpreted it into Japanese, but he answered in English. And my brain was fried after interpreting all day. So as he's interpreting in English, I turned around and said to the guy his answer in Japanese. Everyone bursted with laughter. It was a funny thing.
Love it. And just a little elaboration, Cameron, because from my memory, obviously, Sosai was Korean. So was there any kind of the accent fluidity that you also had to get on top of? Because you're talking a young man learning a new language and there's different dialects. Was there any problems with that?
Yeah, that's a good point, Carlton, because he had a very strong Korean accent.
Okay.
He didn't necessarily not identify as a Korean. He was actually very proud. And, his teacher, Sonei Chu, was actually for a while there in a little bit of trouble because he was very pro-Korean and anti-Japanese occupation of Korea and so on. But Sosai was born into a Korea that at that time was actually a Japanese territory. So he identified as much as being Japanese as Korean. But his accent, his Japanese accent, his accent was Korean. And I think one of the reasons why I had a lot of fun interpreting for him was sometimes I could pick up what he was saying a little better than average because I got so used to his Korean accent. Yeah. But I remember once just a funny experience we had, and I think it was at the World Branch Chief meeting after the third World Tournament. It was that World Branch Chief meeting, and Sosai at that time was still working on consolidating and making sure that the organization stayed strong and everything like this. And at one stage he goes, what he was saying in Japanese was Kyokushin karate wa guts no seishin da, which means Kyokushin karate is the spirit of guts, of having guts.
Yeah.
Guts no seishin. But in Korean, he'd say, in his Korean accent, he'd go, Gogin karate wa guts no seishin da. And I'm thinking, what does he mean? Instead of saying guts, he was saying gus. I'm thinking, what does he mean that Kyokushin karate is the spirit of gas? I couldn't work. I'm going, gas, and he goes, oh, guts. And he was trying to say guts, but I got it mixed up with gas. And it was like the funniest thing going backwards and forwards. And then I realized, oh, okay, now I get it. Kyokushin karate is guts karate, funny. Nicholas's Japanese is out of this world now. Nick Pettis, his Japanese is faster than mine. So
but he does live full time in Japan, right?
Yes, he's lived.
And I think he's had like radio shows as well and things like that, hasn't he, Nick? So
we just think it's so funny because my wife and I used to have a big 55-inch TV on the wall in our bedroom, and we used to watch his shows. And I remember once I'm lying in bed with my feet up, and so you could see my feet, and I took a photo of him on the TV screen saying, look, we're just lying back enjoying your TV show. We just thought it was amazing. I like what Nick has achieved, Remember when he first turned up, I turned up at Hombu one day, and he's come up and he's gone, had that big smile. That's, Nick is proof that you can get away with anything as long as you smile, because he has this beautiful smile and he's big. Nick, and I'm from Denmark, and I've Uchi Deshi, and he was like 72 kilograms or something like that. And, you know, it was the first time I met him. And I remember thinking, wow, what a great energy that this kid's got, you know. So he's good on him. But he'll be able to give you some stories too about his experiences interpreting for Sosai, I'm sure.
Yeah. I went on a camp with him a while back.
Sweden.
He seems like a really nice guy and stuff. So
yeah, down to earth.
Yeah, he is.
And his book was very honest. He was a very, in fact, I think at one stage he withdrew it for sale because he realized how revealing it was because of the honesty of it. But I'm sure others did. I said to him too, man, that's what makes the book so beautiful. So, you know, don't hold back. So I'm glad that he's back making it available again.
Yeah.
And speaking of books, there's a lovely little segue lead into obviously about yourself, obviously being an accomplished author. Yeah. Could you please tell me a little bit more about your book?
Well, what's today, Saturday? They finally arrived on Wednesday. So there's the new book. It's a second edition. This is the original copy. So you can see they're fairly similar.
Mm-hmm. Can you push them a bit closer so we can all see that front page so everyone knows what to buy?
So I can hide my face, did you say?
Yeah.
Nice.
And where are they available to get, Cameron?
On the website. My website is budokarate.com.
Mm-hmm.
And they're available there. They're finally, you know, I'm really grateful to people who started ordering them in November. Yeah. And in some places, they're still not available because, you see, COVID really, as you know, affected things, but it really affected the book because the initial printing contract was with a printer in Korea. And they contacted me and said, we're going to have to say no. I'm sorry, because we're not able to, I don't know whether it was Korean quarantine rules or whatever, but he was no longer able to get hold of certain things to produce book, paper, and so on. So I had to go and find another printer. So I'm running around trying to find printers, and I finally found one in Hong Kong. And with my work, I was going to Hong Kong quite regularly. So I printed stuff in Hong Kong before. So not anymore, but previously I was. And I found a good printer, but then that was delayed because ordering the print job and having it done was first in, first out sort of thing. And because of the delay, there were other jobs in front of me.
Yeah.
And then having said that, so shipping them from Hong Kong to Canada, to USA, to Australia, to New Zealand, and then to Europe, it's a matter of proximity. So Australia is actually a fairly quick trip down from Hong Kong. So they arrived first, and the same ship that dropped them off continued on to New Zealand. So the books arrived in New Zealand today. And for England, I tracked the ship, and the ship that was taking the books to England right now is approaching the Suez Canal. So it's then got to go from there over to Felixstowe. Does that sound right?
Oh, right, yeah, okay. They get the figures up in at the top end, okay.
Yes, and they come off Felixstowe, then they're transported to Cardiff, and they'll be distributed. So unfortunately, and even Holland and Sweden, they're actually going overland. They go from Holland on a railway all the way over. So, I mean, it's taking time for these other places, but at least they started to arrive. You know,
and I've heard they are worth the wait.
My signed copy is going to be a while.
What's that?
Basically, what you're saying is my signed copy is going to be a while.
Well, yeah.
I've heard it's definitely worth the wait. So we are looking forward.
What I hope for is that you just got to look. You know, you put it out there. It's like Khalil Gibran in that book, The Prophet, says, "Speak to us of children," and he says, "Well, your children are like arrows, and pull the bow and you aim straight and you make the arrow as perfectly as you can. But once you let go, it's out of your control. And it's like that with the book. You do everything you can to make sure that the design and the layout is beautiful. And you know, even my good buddy Willie Schultz, who was an old student of mine, but also a good friend, he designed the book. And in the original one, it was pre-digital. So it's all about what they call bromides. You'd print it out and you'd cut it with a knife and you'd glue it onto pages and stick it like this. And Willie taught me so much about graphic design. He'd even teach, for example, you know, I'll see if I can find an illustration, but you certain photos, like this photo here, you'd always have to make sure that the eyes of the subject of the photo were leading on to the next page. If that photo, the eyes were leading off the page, it would have an effect on the readers, on the readability and the continuity. Isn't that fascinating? I didn't know that.
I was actually, it was going to be my next question. You know, how did you come about thinking I'm going to write a book? Obviously, the you know, not this rewrite, but initially, I mean, did you study for this? Did you know, what made you think I'm going to do this if you didn't study?
I had no real intention. What it was the students at the dojo asked me what the names of the kata meant. Okay. And so I just did a 3-page printout, you know, of what the meaning of the name was just to help them. And then someone else asked me, well, what about some terminology? Can you give us some terminology? And that's literally where it started. I thought it
snowballed on.
Yeah. And what I always did and what I've always done is take notes. So I even have notes from my Uchi Deshi days at Hombu back in 84. And Sosai would say something and I'd go back and I'd write notes. And Matsui was the instructor at that time. So I write notes, and I was always a prolific note writer. And I don't know that I necessarily had any intention of writing a book, but after doing the names of the kata and then some terminology, I thought, well, man, there's just so much that.
While I'm at it, let's go. Yeah.
And away it went,
and thankfully you did. Really, to be fair.
Well, laptops and home computers still weren't invented. It was 1987. There was no internet.
Or mobile phones.
What's that?
Or mobile phones back then.
No, nothing like that at all. So I ended up going to one of the local colleges, and they had what they called an electronic learning center. And I went there and I wrote the book in a software program called Multimate. I mean, Microsoft Word didn't exist yet.
No.
So, and then I printed out in really poor quality dot matrix printers, and then the next day I drive across town to a typesetter, and what they would have these big machines which do the job of a tiny little iPad these days, but they would then hand enter what I'd written and produce these what they call bromide galleys. And so they would format it in the correct font size, the correct font, the correct margin width, and then they just printed out miles of it. And then you'd go back and you'd get these layup pages, which first of all, you go to the printer, and printers do everything in different ways. If you could imagine like a piece of paper, and you say, okay, fold it in 8. So you go 1, 2, 3. It's folded in 8. But other printing machines would say, fold it this way.
Yeah.
Upset.
So but it just meant that if you were to then fold that out, the pages would be in a different order. You'd have 1 here, 2 upside down there. So you had to first coordinate with the printer to know that those 8-page layups were in a certain format. Yeah. So page 1 would be there, then page 2 would be here, then page 3 would be there. And so, and so then you'd take the bromides and you'd wax them. You wouldn't glue them, because if you glue them, it's a pain in the butt if you wanted to change it. So you'd wax them, you'd put them through these waxing machines, and then you'd lay it up and you'd adjust it carefully with your eye. All this is done digitally now. You do it all on your computer.
Yeah.
But the experience of Willie teaching me how to do that and working with Willie over the months gave me such a wonderful experience of layout and design and this sort of thing, you know. And so this recent book, there's an English program actually called Affinity. I don't know if you heard of it, but Affinity make Adobe competitors.
Okay.
So Affinity Photo, Affinity Publisher, and Affinity Design, and they're a British software company, and they produce fantastic stuff. And this whole book was done on that Affinity program, and it allowed then Willie we just, instead of having to go around and lay out big sheets, I'd just send him the PDF that night, and we'd work on it, send him the Affinity files. And then at one stage I went up, Willie lives up north in Cairns. We spent a weekend together finalizing. It was such, just having Willie in my life is what made this book, because the invisible part of the book is that design element that actually makes you want to pick it up and keep reading.
Yeah,
because the content could be as amazing as it is, but unfortunately, you know, superficially, we're all attracted to a looked base initially, you know, unless it's recommended, you know, and I'm sure it's recommended, don't get me wrong, but the first one coming out, you're thinking, well, who is this going to work? How's this going to go? How, you know,
100%. And with the second one, I still have that fear, of course, because I've only met one person so far. One of the guys at the dojo at training this morning, he picked his up on Thursday, and he's been reading it. So that's the only feedback I've had so far. So you just hope, keep your fingers crossed that it does the same thing. And it is, I've got if I kept the same font size and the same margin width, the book would be 100 pages thicker. So it'd be too heavy, and that presents problems, because now instead of it being 950 grams, which brings it under the 1 kilo mailing limit, it's now 1.25 or 1.3 or 1.4 kilograms. So it means now you're paying a higher rate of postage. So you'd have to charge people $25 instead of $10 sort of thing. So all this came into play. So we widened the margin and reduced the font size. So the first book was 268 pages, if I recall, 238 pages, and this one is 270 pages. So it's only 30 pages more.
But a lot more depth in there as well, by the sounds of it, right?
I really think, keep my fingers crossed, but I sent it to one of my good buddies, Brad Hansen. He's an old Kyokushin guy who was actually in one of the tournament teams that Dolph Lundgren was. He fought with Dolph, and Brad lives in England now, and I sent him for the final proofread, and he just said, mate, this is just so good. So, awesome. And he's honest with me. I've known him for years. If he said he didn't think so, he would have said, I think you need to go back and rewrite a few sections.
Back to the tuning.
Well, I tell you what I'm learning, Cameron, and obviously the pleasure of speaking to you over, numerous occasions. It's a case of you seem to be one of those humble people that has got a very maverick brain. You absorb all the information, you digest the information, then you're meticulous to the detail, which I think alludes to your fantastic coaching career. I think you need to understand something, be able to break it down into simple parts for you to translate that to your students. And, you're talking about people like Garry O'Neil and Walter Schnaubelt. So, I want you to tell me, how do you apply your methodology when you're coaching, how you've taught the fantastic students that you do? Is there anything like you've put the book together?
Look, I think you're talking to KRT here. You got Wes and Daz, the double T, Wes and Daz. I mean, they're right now, I think they're probably amongst the most successful teachers in the world. So
Thank you.
That's very kind.
Humbling.
Yeah.
And you know that teaching is a philosophy as much as anything. How you go about teaching is what determines the success of your students. And a student's ability to absorb knowledge is different from one person to the next. So the first thing you have to do is recognize that one size doesn't fit all. You have to be able to allow a student to strengthen their strengths. And you need to encourage them to improve any weaknesses, which are completely different to this person here and that person there. This person may be someone who absolutely demands rock solid discipline. And this person over here will respond to a much lighter, easier approach to things. Yeah. And then having said that, you got in Japanese an old saying, Junin Toiro, which means 10 people, 10 colors. So you have to recognize that everyone is slightly different, but you can only punch and kick in so many different ways. And you need to understand that science is science. When you're talking about kinetic energy or impulse or the ability to move and use tendon reflex and things like this, they're universal principles that need to be taught well and introduced. So I think one of the most interesting things that I introduced, look, there's very few things that are original. I think what happens is, the methodology and the science is out there and people adapt that and they find metaphors and different things and apply it. Okay. So, but one of the things that I think that we really did, that I think we did possibly because UK has always been very ahead of the curve, but we introduced 20-second blocks in the rounds. What we would do is we would look at a 3-minute round or a 2-minute round and we break it down to 20-second blocks. So the first 20 seconds, the fighters would do something very specific. And then they would follow that in each 20 seconds. So they would work on, for example, move into a 20-second phase where they would go really, really hard. And then at the end of that 20-second phase, it was almost imperceptible, but they'd back off and they'd gone. And what's happened is now the opponent doesn't understand the 20-second phases, but they feel as though they need to catch up because they just got tagged and they'd be going for it. And the student is just defending, saving energy, but that guy's burning a lot of energy trying to catch up. And then towards the end, you break it down again. And what they would do in the first 20 seconds of the last minute, the second 20 seconds of the last minute, the third 20 seconds like that became, for us, it became almost scientific. And I think that's something that we do. So you'd hear us at tournaments back in the 80s, 90s, I guess, we'd be saying 20-second marks, last 20 seconds.
Amazing.
Like, I think
really good chess.
And I think
people
sorry, go.
Last 30. And I realized, I did some human movement studies at university, and I realized that the human's cardiovascular system has a lot of trouble sustaining optimal output for more than 20 seconds. Yeah. So I'm thinking, you get people to do 30 seconds, they go hard and they fade in the last 9 seconds. But you do 20 seconds, we knew that the body was able to sustain that output for the full 20 seconds. Yeah. And so, as you know, you're not actually in a fight in a tournament. We're just talking about tournament fighting here. You're not in a fight. There's nothing realistic about it. What it is a game with judges, and it's all about, if you knock them out, it's a different thing. It makes it a lot easier. But other than that, you're creating an impression with judges, and you have to convince them that your output was better than the other guys. Yeah. And that's what the game is. It's just a game of creating an impression,
That's a fantastic breakdown.
It's interesting you talk about them 20 seconds because I'm a big fan of Garry O'Neil. He's probably my favorite fighter. I would say. But you can see the way that he fights is kind of in those blocks. You know, he comes in, throws a flurry of techniques, flamboyant, you know, strong, etc. Really creates the person a lot of problems, and then backs out, and then he's got a lot of movement, and you know, so it's interesting because he played that perfectly in that regime.
And to think about that, the scientific
bang, and then he'd back off a little bit, and they'd come in, and he's just going boom, 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 and they're trying to. And then when the
scientific part about that is really good. The fact that you need a little bit of energy saving again to build the battery up for the 20-second flurry, for the phosphate pool to take out again. I'm just amazed by the fact that you guys have been doing this so many years ago, because you know that's the way you should be training now at these times, and that's very ahead of time.
We got it from the Bible. You see, the Bible talks about tournament fighting. You know, did you know that?
I
no. You want to run that by me again?
Ecclesiastes 7:8. Ecclesiastes. Better is the end of a thing than the beginning thereof. And so we used to think, how many times have you seen guys go out and you think, my God, this guy's on fire. And in the last minute they go, they hadn't read the Bible. It's that simple, you know, just finish stronger than you started and it's all good. You know?
Love it. Now, because I've just been noting at the time, and there's so many other questions I've got to ask you, Cameron, so I've got to say this. Obviously, as a young man, we're all impressioned, you know, but we're going to be influenced by the people that we're with. You happen to be lucky to be the great man, and we all know about the great man's bull story. But I do hear that you might have a little rendition of your own that's similar to a bull story, and I would just like to throw that out there for you to tell us a little bit about your experience with the non-bull, let's say.
Sosai.
No,
yes,
yours.
Sosai than yours.
Yeah, Sosai had the bull, and you
was emulating. Yes, please.
You know, it's another really important scientific principle that you need to start small and build up. You know, you can't go out and fight in the world tournament in your first ever match.
I agree.
Condition yourself. So my auntie and uncle had a sheep station. And I thought, if I'm ever going to get a handle on this bullfighting, I need to start with a ram. Okay? And so
the theory is there. The theory is there.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, it's a scientific thing. You can't turn down science. So I thought, I'll take on this ram. So I'm there at, you know, the sheep have backed off. My uncle had a shearing shed. Not every sheep station has a shearing shed. What they do is they send the sheep to the shearing shed. Well, anyway, the sheep are being unloaded for the shearing shed. And there's this ram. And I thought, it's now. I'm going to get this guy. I've gone and I'm confronting this ram.
How old were you at this point, Cameron?
Oh, probably 15. You know? I was a tough 15. I'm going to take on a ram. And he's got these horns, and he puts his head down, and I fairly crap my pants. And oh God, I think I've overdone myself here. So anyway, the ram comes, and I brace on the ram. The next thing you know, I'm trampled under. And I get up, and it was a field full of sheep shit, right? And I'm covered in it. My mum is over here with her sister, pissing themselves laughing. And my mum knew what I was thinking. And she said, well, I think that's it for your bullfighting. never entertained the thought again in my life.
No, didn't think twice about it.
I'll just go and watch that ram get sheared, and I thought, there, we got you back.
Yeah, one time I'm going to get you back.
Yeah,
I still admire the Kahunas for even taking it on. I think Sosai and the Bull, I think that's a level of madness you've got to go to. But you to have the courage to even take on a ram, I salute you. I do, I salute you. Especially at 15.
I had the courage to take it on until it looked at me, and then I thought, no, I really overstood.
Yeah. All of a sudden, that switch went on and went, what was I thinking?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
How good would it have been if Sosai would have heard this story? He's like, very, very proud of you, young Padawan, for trying.
I'm sorry, just shaking.
But that's, I mean, it just highlights the fantastic feat that Sosai achieved. Because
I agree.
It's a mental thing.
I've written about it I've written to quite an extent in the new book, and I have to say that there are people out there who talk about Sosai and have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. There are YouTube videos out there. There's some guy in America who infatuates over his wisdom and intelligence, and he has a degree, and so they research, and their research goes one level deep, and then they make a judgment based on what they see, and they have no idea what they're talking about. So they do a YouTube video which gets 1 million views. You know how hard it is to get good views on YouTube. You get the YouTube. Hang on, someone's trying to call me. Can you give me a second? I think that's my wife trying to get in.
For sure.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Mate. You've got to speak to the wife.
Yeah.
And at that moment, we're going to go to a commercial break. We're back after the commercial break, and we're now going to carry on the interview with the legend that is Cameron. Take two.
When the wife calls, you can't ignore it.
All right, mate. My wife's sitting back beside me. Don't mess about with the boss.
Yeah. That's why we all do karate, right? That's why we all started doing that. Maybe we get something. We got something to tell over there.
Yeah. Trouble is, with women, mate, you got to sleep at some stage. Don't matter what downgrade you got, they're getting you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Sleep with one eye open. Yeah, I'm telling you straight.
You sleep one day, and we've all heard stories about that. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw this one out there, and we can pick it up where we're going. Is obviously you was explaining to us, obviously, the real story behind Sosai and the part in your book. And I'd really like to hear from the horse's mouth exactly the Sosai experience, not the YouTube rubbish and the people that don't research, from the horse's mouth.
Well, look, my experience is just a snapshot at a certain time. There were people who were there, and I went to great lengths, for example, to find witnesses to the 1947 tournament that he fought in, which is very hard to find any record of course, because it was, you can't even find records of political events and things like that in 1947. So to find the event of to find a record of an obscure karate tournament at a time when karate wasn't even a thing, it was very difficult. But so I did find a witness to it, so I was able to get information through that. But as far as the bull goes, people, I don't know why, but people try to minimize Sosai. People can't help themselves. There's an old saying which I really love. People try to grow tall by chopping the heads off others.
Yeah, for sure.
An attitude which just blows my mind, because we have to realize that the karate that we have today is 100% because people like Sosai went beyond themselves and made it available to people, and the number of people who minimize Sosai, and it blows my mind, because you speak to people like Uchi Deshi, who I speak to a lot, and he was like the great kicker from the first world tournament. He came fourth, I think, in the world tournament, and he was sensational. kicker, and he's 70 years old now, and he still does Muay Kyage like this, and he still does just incredible. Yeah. So I mean, he talks about Sosai, and he just rolls his eyes when he hears these stories, and he says people have no idea how incredible this man was. You know,
I mean, Hanshi says the same. To be fair, he's like, you know, all of these stories that go around, and I mean, it happens. You know, fictional, almost a fictional character in some ways. You know, with superpowers, and you know, they just make up stories further down the line because they can't grasp. They physically can't grasp. I mean, to my mind, nobody's ever done that since, and nobody did it before. So people almost doubt that things existed.
I think Bruce proved the point. You step in there with just a ram, you've got to test your minerals, so let alone getting in there with a 600 kilo. You're mad.
Yeah. And like Takeda Sensei said, the guy who said that the average person's thinking 3 years ahead, Sosai was thinking 30 years ahead. People have to realize, and not only Sosai, Mrs. Oyama was acutely intelligent.
Yeah.
You know, she's the one that, for example, came up with a lot of the original T-shirt designs, poster designs. She designed the famous Kyokushin gi with the 3/4 sleeve and the very masculine-looking Kyokushin gi, and you know her input was undeniable as well.
You say something right there. You say something right there because there's a Netflix show right now, the age of the samurai, the battle for Japan. In that show, it says a lot of the wives of the samurai, they were brilliant. They thought of so many things. They did do a lot for their samurai husband, who then went into battle and do this stuff. But that says something about Miss Oyama as well. That he was the samurai, and she was the wife behind the samurai, thinking of so many things. So I really love the fact that you say this, because like a week ago I saw this episode, and I was a little bit blown away by the fact that a lot of the females in that era thought about the fight their husband was gonna have, because it was truly life and death.
100%. And you know, it was like people like Oda Nobunaga's wife and things like that. They weren't just, you know, standing by their man. They were actually making decisions that changed the history of Japan. You know? And in Kyokushin, I'm just looking for a particular page, if I can open it. Mrs. Oyama was known as the Bodhisattva of Kyokushin. They called her the Bodhisattva of Kyokushin. And a Bodhisattva is just a Buddhist term which kind of refers to a highly God-realized soul. And so she was seen very, very regarded very highly by the Kyokushin. So what I did is I took a photo of a Japanese Buddhist text, and you can see I put it next to the photo of Mr. and Mrs. Oyama, because that's what she was like to, she was the Bodhisattva of Kyokushin. You see that photo there?
Yeah.
I took it on my mobile phone, but I just thought I'd put it in.
Fantastic.
Yeah, because her value to Kyokushin can't be minimized. And this is why it was so heartbreaking to see the way Kyokushin as an organization totally minimized the family and left them for dead, basically. They didn't care, you know. Very sad, but that's another story.
Stupid politics. Yeah.
So online,
I think that Cameron, you alluded to it before with the politics it's in every organization. So, you know, Kyokushin isn't just the only one, but I think, like you said, some people forget the actual essence of the art, and it's not about your stripes. It's about being better than you were yesterday and hoping that you can make a positive difference in somebody else's life if you're a coach. That, to me, is a martial art. Anything about the hierarchy and the politics, that's a whole new topic we could go on for years about. But the one thing I know is, talking to you are, and the two boys to up and right, they are actually promoting the essence of the art. Just concentrate on the art. Let the politics, leave that alone. Just be you and be humble.
Sosai once said to me, we're talking about someone who died, and he said, there are 3 types of people in the world. He said, first of all, there are the people that when they die, the world is lesser because of their passing. He said, then you've got people when they die, the world is infinitely better off for their passing. And he said, then you've got people that when they die, no one even notices that they've passed. And he said, and the objective is to become one of those people that when you die, the world is lesser off for your absence. And that represents Sosai. I mean, he, you know, after the first world tournament, he was offered an awful amount of money, an amazing amount of money to buy Kyokushin, because someone who was involved in the All Japan Karate Federation could see that Kyokushin was like, they'd have the Japan Karate Federation All Japan Championship, and there'd be 200 people would turn up, and they're all relatives of the competitors. They'd have a Kyokushin tournament, and they'd sell out tickets like a concert 2 months before.
Yeah.
So this guy who was very high up in Japan Karate knew that. So he tried to buy Kyokushin off Sosai. And he's literally come to Hombu with the equivalent of he offered the equivalent of about $10 million.
Wow.
And he's brought $3 million in cash and piled it on the table, knowing the magnetic attracting force.
I was just going to say that. I was just about to say the same. The cash, when it's in front of you and that amount, whew.
Yeah.
And he said it's not for sale. And he said, no, yeah, we want it. This guy was not used to not getting his way. And even Mrs. Oyama said, well, it had really helped because the first world tournament put him in debt like $1.5 million. So that money on the table alone as a down payment would have covered everything, and they'd be set for life. And he said, no, it's not for sale. And the guy kept persisting. And if I heard the story right, Sosai knocked the money off the table, and he said, you don't understand, it's not for sale. And later on, when Mrs. Oyama asked him why he didn't sell, he said, how could I do that to the students? I spend my life trying to tell them to live with character and live with integrity and live with nobility. And one of the worst things you can do is become a slave for money. And the first thing that happens is when money appears, I go, yeah, give it to me. He said, I could never do that. So people don't realize that Kyokushin, as we know it, could have pretty well died after the first world tournament if it wasn't Sosai's love for service to his students and his integrity, you know.
That's really interesting because obviously Kyokushin grew from that point to enormous value, enormous. And, you know, and to have, I mean, you know, the equivalent of 10 million at any stage in your life, let alone maybe back then, would have been enormous. But you know, it's very easy to. I mean, people do that all so often. You know, we hear lots of people that are just selling grades. You know, okay, you want to come to my organization, great. I'm not saying it's a Kyokushin, but you know, it exists in life everywhere. You know, you move from one job to another for more money. You move from one organization to another for another stripe. You know, it's all about superficial growth, I suppose, in that area. And it's
right. I think you're right, Darren. And one of the things about martial arts, and I'm sure it's not just karate, but karate especially, is those stripes on the belt are the biggest challenge that we face because it's like sumo. You build up to a certain level. You get to that top level. Once you lose, bang, you're gone. There's no kind of like hanging around because you've been there for a certain length of time, you know. And with karate, the problem is you do your grading and you never have to do your grading again.
So, and I don't agree with that in a certain way, because I think people lose touch and lose position, and you know, and grades can be a form of an illusion to some respect at that stage. Yes,
well, they are
great.
An illusion.
Huh?
You're 100% right. They are. They're a total illusion. This is why I've always said that anyone at any grade should have to regrade to a certain point, not the whole.
At one point, yeah.
Every 2 years, they have to keep showing that they're in the game. Because if you get your Shodan in 1981 and you don't train for 20 years, you have no right to Shodan anymore.
Yeah, it is. That's so weird. That's why I really love what you say there. Like all the people who wear their, whatever grade you are, you just should be revising every 2 to 3, maybe every 5 years. Revise what you are, and are you still worth the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stripes you're wearing?
Yeah. Are you still relevant? Do you still have touch base? We're not saying that you can jump over 6 chairs and do that kind of stuff, but I agree.
I completely agree with that.
Well, I always have a saying, the old saying, "You're only as good as your last workout," is a fallacy. It's a lie, because if your last workout was in 2004, you're definitely not as good as the last workout. So I always say you're only as good as this morning's workout. And if you train this morning, you have the right to call yourself a martial artist. Yeah. If you didn't train this morning, you need to zip the lip and shut up. And for that day, at least, pull back and be a little humble about it, because you haven't earned the right to call yourself a martial artist.
Although that is a little bit unfair of you to say now, because you're ahead in their time. It is still this morning, yeah.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's true, and I think training is the essence of being in martial arts, not just standing in a gi necessarily, because that anyone can do that,
One of the new sections in the book, which I think people will find it enjoyable, is I talk about, I don't say in the book, but I have a saying that the body is treacherous but honest, and the mind is loyal but deceitful. Mm-hmm. Because the mind will try to convince you and everybody that all is good. But the body, you can't hide anything.
Yeah.
It's treacherous. You train your whole life, and then one day it's just bang. Your body can't fight the progress of time. It's very honest. If you're out of shape and overweight, you can't hide that. You can buy fashion that will minimize it, but the very fact that you wear that type of fashion means that you're trying to minimize it.
Big baggy t-shirts I use. and a little bit of lycra underneath to hold it in, see?
Yeah. I tried a little bit of lycra, but it didn't work. Yes, it was a good Christmas. But anyway, in the book I talk about that, and I talk about training in the teens, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and what you should be doing in those times. And the fact of the matter is, now that I'm in my 60s, I need to respect the fact, for example, your knees aren't the same. Your connective tissue is not the same. You can still be flexible, stretch, but the explosiveness is not there anymore. And so training, you need to be comfortable with time, and you need to find your own level in terms of training. So, for example, this morning, we have a set of stairs, and those stairs are tough stairs. The young guys, the teens, they do 10. The 20s, they do a few less. So we have guys there in their 70s. The guys who were in their 70s, all they had to do was one set of stairs, push up, sit up, squats, a little bit of that before we did kata. The guys in their 50s, they had to do 2. In their 50s, they had to do 3. In their 40s, had to do 4, etc., like that. And what it does is, first of all, it removes the infatuation that a young guy might feel when his body is fitter, faster, and stronger than someone in their 40s. And the guy in the 40s doesn't have to feel minimized by that, because he's still fulfilling what he can do with his body. Yeah. And when we finished all that, we went off and did a series of kata, and everybody can join in the kata, and they do the kata at their own level. And this is the beautiful, beautiful thing of karate is, you get someone who leaves karate because of kickboxing or whatever. I went into Muay Thai, it's more realistic. 20 years later or 15 years later, what are they doing? I was like, dude, You're 40 years old. What do? You go to the gym. You can't skip anymore because your knees and ankles don't have the explosiveness. Yeah. What do? You spend the next hour hitting a bag and just walking around. I mean, the beauty of karate is that you can be 50 and a third dan or a fourth dan, and you still have this unbelievable body of knowledge and learning that you can just keep going like that. And if you want to do nothing else, Shihan Bobby Lowe said to me once, he never, ever missed doing Kensho Kata. And he said sometimes, somewhere, if nothing else, he did Tensho Kata. And he said, even when he was sick in bed and he couldn't get out of bed, he would close his eyes and meditate and visualize himself doing Tensho Kata. He said, in that way, that's how he stayed connected to the art that he loves. And that was a really beautiful lesson to me. This is why I coined that phrase, you're only as good as this morning's workout, because that's the only thing that really counts, I think.
Well, as you've just said there, and so beautifully put, because especially in Kyokushin and most karates, you've got so many levels with the kata you can train on until an elderly age. It's also very clear that your mind has always thought outside the box to obviously find different avenues to keep you switched on. So, which leads me into the next question is, how did you become an MMA referee?
Well, there you go. I mean, I even refereed UFC, but I don't think they like me because.
Have you? Oh, I didn't know that. And yeah, obviously knew you did MMA, but didn't know you refereed in the UFC.
Muay Thai world titles, kickboxing world titles, Shuto world titles, shoot boxing, and MMA. And the reason I got MMA was because I had Kyokushin refereeing experience, of course. Everyone in Kyokushin, I think Kyokushin, generally speaking, offers a very, very solid refereeing body of knowledge to allow people to understand the responsibilities of a referee and how to go about it. And then I started in 1994, I think. There's a really nice guy in Australia named Peter DeBean who'd been going to Brazil to train BJJ, and he was bringing Carlos Gracie Jr. out to Australia. And he contacted me to do the Queensland leg of that. So I arranged the seminar in 94 for Carlos Gracie Jr. And I had, just before that, with my work, I was going to Los Angeles. So I was training regularly at the Machado Brothers BJJ school. And so, like even Sosai knew that I was refereeing kickboxing and stuff. I would tell him, I'm training kickboxing, refereeing kickboxing. And I think he appreciated, one, that I was honest with him, and two, he knew I wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
I was born with Kyokushin running in my veins, and I'll never leave Kyokushin. Even if Kyokushin leaves me, even if the organizations fall to bits and they don't exist anymore, I'll still be doing Kyokushin because I'm like you guys. It's just, it is what it is. But I went away and did kickboxing, BJJ, and all this sort of stuff. It doesn't change the fact. What I did was I'll look at BJJ and I'll interpret BJJ and I'll think, dude, that's straight out of Pinan 2. Or, now that makes sense. The move, what does this movement mean? Okay, now I get it. It's like, wow, yeah, this move here, I'm reaching down. We
gives
all
you an
know.
extra dimension, an extra layer.
Yeah.
And
more depth.
One thing that I did, you see, like, this is karate. See those books there? What is karate? This is karate, advanced karate. And I went through those 3 books once, and this is what you do when you have idle time. I had nothing better to do with my time. So I counted all the techniques as they're presented in the book. And my training philosophy now is wrapped around what I call the 5 ranges. Kick range, punch range, headbutt elbow range. I call that headbutt elbow because the distance for an effective headbutt and the distance for effective elbow are millimeter same. If you can headbutt someone, you can hit him with an elbow. So I call the third range headbutt elbow range. The fourth range is stand-up grapple range, and the fifth range is ground range. And I looked at these books and I counted the techniques, and techniques in the ground range, the stand-up grapple range, represent about 70% of what Sosai taught. The techniques that are applicable to tournaments represent about 25% of what Sosai taught, and the rest was in the headbutt elbow range, which are neither really, you know.
Which is really, really funny, because 80 to 90% of karate and people who train karate are only actually using maybe the 25 to 30% of what we really have to offer.
Yeah,
100%, because there are so many schools that have grown up through the tournament era where tournament fighting is karate, and that's 100% fine. You go back, you know, to Itosu Unko 100 years ago, where he tried to present karate as an acceptable form of physical training for schools in Japan. And he even said, the first thing you need to do is determine why you're doing karate. Are you doing it because you want to fight, or are you doing it for health and physical well-being? So because they're both acceptable, but they're very different.
Yeah.
Tournaments are very different. You can be a really good tournament fighter, but if you've never had anyone come in, throw a punch in your face, dive in, take your legs to the ground and drive their shoulder into your ribs, it's a new experience. And so in 94, when I was training with Carlos Gracie Jr., he brought 2 students with him. One of them's name was Marcio Feitosa. He was a 19-year-old kid. He went on to win 8 world BJJ titles.
Wow.
At that stage, I must have been, I can't remember, I've been training for 25 years. I've been training for longer than he'd been alive. And as we grappled, he giggled. He was like, you know, the proverbial uncle with his hand on my head, and I'm he just giggled with me. And everything I was doing, he knew what I was going to do, and he would do things to elicit expected responses, because that's what you do. And so when I saw that actually most of what Sosai taught was not allowed in tournaments, it brought me back to the branch chief meeting after the 4th world tournament, I believe, or it might have been the 5th, where he said that the 70s was a period of development, the 80s was a period of consolidation, and the 90s was going to be what he called the Shin Soseki, or the new genesis of Kyokushin. And no one really knew exactly what he meant. It's a new genesis, so it's a rebirth. So it's not new directions altogether. He wasn't introducing anything particularly new. What he was doing was recreating. And the way I saw it was that, and you look back on it now, it's much easier to see. The first generation people are all dying of old age. The first world tournament people, they're all in their late 60s and 70s now. They're getting old. Well, what does Kyokushin offer people outside of tournaments? And so I think Sosai realized at that time that now we have to add layers onto what they're doing. What he was going to do, no one knows. But for me, what I realized is the impact, the damage to your body from impact training. I mean, you think about, like, I know from refereeing stuff now, I look and I think, I can't believe I even did that stuff back then. How is it possible that I was stupid enough to allow someone to hit me that hard with no padding on? I mean, I was insane. That's the 20-year-old resilience. You know, now it's like, you cannot do that in training. If you do that, you cannot move for 3 days. So what can you do? Well, what you can do is actually you take your kata and you work out what it means. So I have another thing which I've written in the book called a block is a lock, is a blow, is a throw.
Yeah.
And that's a principle that a certain block can also translate into a lock. It can also translate into a blow, and it can also translate into a throw. What you need is the experience in the 5 ranges to be able to feel that. Yeah. Because having the knowledge is very different to having the ability to do it. So this is where you can actually, the beautiful thing about the inside ranges is there's this lovely thing called the tap. Where in Kyokushin, you're fighting away, you put on a technique, and if you pull it in the dojo, sometimes you don't know whether it will really work. Sometimes, I mean, I've thrown a kick at someone and they've gone, dude, that was a killer. That would have knocked me out. But I know it wouldn't have knocked them out because it wasn't the right distance or timing or whatever. On other times, you could throw a kick that would have knocked them out and they minimize it. They go, yeah, but that, you know, you can't approach reality in the dojo the way you can in a tournament. But then you add the aspect of the tap. And all of a sudden you grab someone, spin them around, put a choke on, they tap. Now, if it's working, they tap. If it's not working, they're not going to tap. They're still fighting it, trying to survive. Yeah. So that aspect of it allows you in your older age to continue with your karate, continue learning, continue applying the techniques from the kata. What does this mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? You know, and all of a sudden, a whole new world opens up.
It's amazing.
And you have the tap. Bang! Someone comes in, they throw that punch. Boom! You come in, you've got the lock. You're putting pressure on. Is it working or is it working? I don't know. Then they tap. Yes, it worked.
I don't know what the listeners, because obviously there's going to be a lot of listeners to this. I don't know what they think, and I'm just going to address to them. But I need to get my ass to Australia and train with you because you inspire me, man. Since the beginning we met each other, you inspired me. But when I hear you talking about this, I really want to train. You know what I mean? This is amazing. So good.
I think you're doing all right, Wes.
I think there's an opportunity, isn't there? Don't you have a camp coming up in the next couple of years or something?
23, right?
We'll definitely in 2023, provided the COVID situation is sorted, and we think now 2023 is good. But last year we thought this year it'd be okay.
Yep. Yeah. This is quite a special camp as well, isn't it? Like,
tell us about this.
Memorabilia-wise, so to speak.
Yeah, it's 100 years since Sosai's birth. So I've called it the Centennial International Training Camp.
Yeah.
I've opened it to every organization, every group, and everyone's welcome. And I'd love to see at least 200 or 300 people come. We have the facility at the Gold Coast. It's one of the most beautiful campsites, literally on the ocean front. So half the training, the morning training, will be down at the beach, and it's literally one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. And I'm going to invite as many people as I can to come along. And whilst I love traveling, doing seminars and teaching guys the different ranges, I have good friends. One particular friend, a buddy of mine, Dan Higgins, who's a BJJ black belt, but is also a good wrestler and a mixed martial artist. And he actually represented Australia with Shotokan Karate in Japan. So he understands karate, and he's taken that connection and that ability. See, the big thing that Kyokushin lacks, people talk about we don't have head punches. Who cares? You know, you fight a Kyokushin tournament, well, you don't punch in the head. Judo has strikes and punches and kicks, but you don't see them in their tournaments.
No.
Every system has certain techniques which they remove from the sporting aspect.
Exactly. Yeah, of course.
Yes, 100%. So we have this potential for all these beautiful techniques in Kyokushin, and it's like being a kid in a toy shop when you realize that something you've been doing all these years, all of a sudden you think, wow, I never even saw that.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden it takes your training and extends it 30 years.
Yeah.
Or 40 years, because the number one enemy of all training is injury.
Yep.
If you get injured, you're out for a week, a month, 3 months, a year. So the number one thing in the dojo we always talk about is Number one enemy is injury, and the most important thing is to be the best training partner you can be, so that you can encourage your partner without them getting injured.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that you get that idiot who comes in who tries to, and even if you can knock them out, it's a no-win situation. Someone's going to get hurt. It's silly.
Yeah. And they're not going to want to train with you in the future. I've always felt that way myself as well. I'm like, that bully, for example, that you spoke about in Hombu, great. He smashes up a white belt. I mean, does he really walk away feeling good about himself, beating up a beginner?
Well, I'm sure psychotherapists have a field day with people like that.
Yeah.
What happened to you when you were 4 years old that you're like this? But you're right. There's no future in it. But the beauty that I love about closing that gap, for example, one of the things that I really love to teach now is, what I like about Dan Higgins is he understands the transitions. And what Kyokushin will lack is the ability to transition from one range to the next range. And this is what GSP was good about. I mean, this guy was essentially an eclectic fighter. Of course, he has a Kyokushin background, but that was not really his background. Okay, that's not what gave him his strengths in UFC. What gave him his strengths in UFC was this incredible ability to transition through the ranges and take someone to the ground. He had one of the most successful takedown records in UFC. Yeah. Well, my buddy and my coach, Dan Higgins, he's really good at that. He can show you how to transition from outside ranges to inside ranges. And
with that insight, though, Cameron, do you actually think, because it is so crucial and the way the world has changed, and we should involve some jiu-jitsu in our syllabus to actually expand Kyokushin? And if we could, how could we? Because we've got that set format, but I think jiu-jitsu is so crucial to any martial art, because like you say, you can be the best stand-up in the world, but when you go to the floor, what are you going to do? And someone's got to take you down.
We have two syllabuses at the dojo. We have the Kyokushin syllabus, and then we have what we call the complete syllabus. And as a roundabout reference, to get a shodan, you need about a blue belt level in BJJ. And in BJJ, there's a saying. There's a saying in BJJ, a blue belt to beat the white belts, and a purple belt to beat the rest of the world. If you can get to a blue belt in BJJ, a good quality blue belt in BJJ, and that's just pretty well the first level off white belt. If you can get to a good quality BJJ blue belt, you can pretty well look at any stand-up fighter in the world and go, yeah, I've got his measure. It's that crazy, because as long as and Carlos Machado, the Machado brothers, amazing guys. And one of my first coaches was a guy named Carlos Machado. And he said to me, he said, you karate guys, he said, you're bass, you're strong. He said, if I fight the karate guys, he speaks a lot better English now. I'm just pretending to do my Brazilian accent. But anyway, you fight the karate guys. If you fight me, you have one chance. You punch me, you kick me. If you get me, beautiful. You win the fight. All power to you. But if you miss that one chance, it's 100% guaranteed you lose the fight.
Yeah.
And that really made me think. That's very interesting. And
if you look at the first UFC as well, like where Gerard Gordeau, he was a great stand-up fighter, Brazilian crazy guy as well, mental. That's probably why he was such a good fighter. But when he was fighting Gracie, he had no chance. He had no chance. The good as a fighter he was, and cleaning out the tournament in his fights, and then getting against probably one of the best ground fighters there's ever been. He was gone.
Okay, so there's your answer. What do you do? So in the dojo, we have what we call the quintessential questions. It's a play on words. Ask yourself, what did I do well tonight? We always ask, what did I do well first? Because it gives you confidence. And Then you ask, what didn't I do well? And then you ask, what am I going to do about that in the next session? So you've always got something to work on. What am I going to do about that? And this is what we do at the end of training, not every time, but like after a hard kumite session, we'll sit in a circle while we're stretching, and each person, what did you do well? What didn't you do well? What are you going to do about it? And that gives you the 80-20 focus.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I use a very similar principle with my team at work, and I use three P's. Talk about positives first, problems next, and productivity third. So we get the good feeling out first. Then we talk about, okay, we've got some good measures. What are we having problems with, and then how are we going to adjust and fix this towards the end.
I do exactly the same with my students as well, especially when we look at when we look back at a fight. Always look at the positives indeed.
Because it's easy. If you go straight into the negatives, people then they switch off.
But have you seen how many coaches, like after a fight, it's like, oh, you should have done this better, you should have done.
But Wes is
the fight's already been done.
Yeah.
Well, for a start, I'm writing that down. I'm going to put the 3 Ps in my next book, Dazzle.
No worries, man. Just put a reference to me. That's all. You know, I'm more than happy with that.
You want a reference? You're sorry.
Yeah. Or just a signed copy. I'm happy with that. To be fair,
you know,
it's going to take a while, D. I'll tell you. I'm still waiting for mine. It's on some boat somewhere in the Suez Canal, apparently.
Yeah, it might be long. But you know, it's funny to say that, because I had an Uchi Deshi live in with me for 6 months, and he went into pro boxing.
Yeah.
And he retired undefeated, the Australian light middleweight professional champion. And nice. I trained him for his last 3 years. And I have to say, I learned more about boxing from him than he learned from me. But we had such an incredibly solid relationship that's what made it work. And I'd be in the corner with him, and because he was Walter Schnaubelt's nephew, actually, as a Kyokushin fighter. He was really good as well. You can look him up. Tyrone Cyclone Tongia, his name was, and he was a Cyclone Tongia, Tongia. Ty's a great guy.
I've got you.
And
I've got you. You know, I'll do the research, Cameron.
Good on you. I ended up
right, dig it in.
The last few years, hi honey, of his life, of his fight career. And in the corner, we would see the way cornermen would talk to their fighters. And sometimes they'd be slapping them, going, come on, you got to do this, you got to do that. And sometimes they'd be going, what you want to do is, let's try that left, right, left hook, ripper, bang, fight, you know. And they're telling their fighter how to fight between rounds. It's like, when I used to be in the corner with Tyrone, I'd go, that was a good round. Let's just do a little bit more of that. That's all I'd say. How you feeling? Good. How are you finding? Oh, okay. So let's just get the head movement a little bit more. And when you finish, we wouldn't talk almost.
No.
It's just like if I have to tell him, do a left, right, left hook, slip left, hit with the right, hit with a body shot, rotate off, hit with the right. It's like, dude, you should have done that in the training room.
Yeah.
What a cornerman has to do is allow the fighter to best optimize his skills without interruption, you know? And so that's the way you need to train. And when you add on those principles of grappling, you see, I always come back to something Sosai said, is if you want to call yourself a martial artist, you cannot be ignorant of the fundamental movement philosophies of other martial arts. You can't be ignorant of other martial arts.
No. You
can't call yourself a Kyokushin fifth dan and get tooled by a 19-year-old grappler because you just don't know the fundamentals of how to deal with the double leg or something like that. You don't have to learn all the skills. All you need to do is work on how to survive and bring the game back to your range of specialty. You see, and that's even in that's something you can do. And like we've even gone, some of our Kyokushin guys, we've entered BJJ contests and come away with first and second in different divisions, or second or gold medal, and we're karate guys.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the beauty of Kyokushin. I think many people have had a very open mind, and obviously from back in the day when Sosai was always open for challenges and expanding the horizon of Kyokushin, many people have gone into kickboxing, K1, GSP, and a few others into UFC. I think we are, we've got a really, really good skill range that enables us to adapt. You just have to be open enough to take
You're
that.
Right. And you especially, Darren, because of your skills. But you can look at sometimes, like earlier today, I was sitting with a young fella who's here staying with me for a few days training, phenomenal young mover. But we were watching some commentary on YouTube about leg kick skills and so on, and UFC and we're thinking, you know what? The average good quality Kyokushin fighter has better leg skills and leg defense skills than anyone in UFC today.
Yep, 100%.
This is the beauty of Kyokushin is, one, whilst we don't have headshots, well, that's a fair call. It's not that you can't punch in the head. It's just you don't have the vision to work with the punches coming at you. But that you can sort that out. But more to the point is, it gives you, first of all, you don't exaggerate events as they happen in the ring. Some guy will hit with a kick, and the crowd goes, whoa. And the Kyokushin guy goes, well, that was just a kick.
Yeah.
Kyokushin gives you that direct experience of how to go ahead with how to accept the challenge without getting phased. That fighting spirit, and it gives you a solid body of, like, some of the guys that I had a great opportunity to work with, like Randy Couture, Dan Henderson, Frank Trigg, those guys who are all UFC fighters, and working with them gave me the most incredible opportunity to work my wrestling skills.
Yeah.
What allowed me to do that was I could turn up at their gym and not feel minimized, not have to make excuses for myself, because Kyokushin gave me, they would watch me throw a kick and they go, wow, yeah, that makes sense. Can you show me how that works?
Well, Shihan, I need to ask you one final question, because I can sit here like a little boy and listen to you all day long, and I can't believe it's already been 2 hours and it feels like 5 minutes. I had the same the other week, a quick chat and boom, time's gone. So I want from you, because of the insight, and anyone that watch this must see your lateral brain, your attention to just being better than you were yesterday with your humility. Give me one piece of wisdom for a young student like myself, or used to be young, but I still class myself as relatively young. What bit of wisdom could you give me to say, what would you say to someone like myself?
Well, I would say never close off the opportunity to train with anyone, because everyone out there who has trained for 5-10 years they've gathered a body of knowledge which may be completely unrelated to what you know, and you may see them. If you close yourself off to that, you miss out on a world of knowledge. If there's always opportunities. Stay open, if you always allow yourself the humility to be taught by someone, it is unbelievable what you can learn, because then it's up to you to connect the metaphor, and it's up to you to find the metaphor. They can show you this, and this, and you relate it to your own experiences. But if you shut that off, like I can remember 25 years ago when Nick Pettis was out, we did a camp together. We did a series of camps together. And at one stage, he asked me to do a grappling thing. So I'm working with certain guys that I trained with before on the grappling, and helping them realize that just by opening their mind just a little bit, certain things can allow you to completely change the complexity of your own skills. And then when the camp finished, none of them ever did anything about it. Because when you have your first dan, second dan, third dan, actually having the humility to realize that a 19-year-old kid who's been training 6 months in BJJ will kick your butt, whether you like it or not. That's very hard to accept.
Yeah.
If you take Sosai's teaching, Sosai was, for a start, he was very much an early maverick, a mixed martial artist. He was off in America fighting guys, not knowing what to expect. Could be anything. Okay. So you take Sosai's principle of never allow yourself to be ignorant of other martial arts. So some of the most memorable experience, one of the most memorable experience I have, for example, is this guy here, Koichi Tohei, 10th Dan Aikido.
Okay.
In 1979, I had an opportunity to spend a week training with him. And I could have gone, Aikido, give me a break. I'm Kyokushin. But I thought, he was my childhood hero. When I was 14, his book, Key in Daily Life, then it was called Key in Daily Life. That was my Bible. That was giving me, that opened a door to a whole new world for me. This whole concept of going in. See, the Western world has become increasingly secular, so we don't know how to go within. But everything that everyone wants can be found by going within. And he was the first one to teach me that. So in 1979, I've had an opportunity to go and train with him every day for a week. And I mean, that's one of the highlights of my life. Having one-on-one Koichi Koe right there, touching me at certain places to teach me to relax. And, oh, man. But if I'd shut my mind off,
yeah,
Aikido, I would have had that experience.
Yeah. I think is a valuable mention to everybody. And I've said it many a times. Everyone can teach you something. 90% of what I teach you may not be applicable to you. 90% of Wes, Cameron, and Carlton teachers may not be applicable to you. But that 10% adds up from all of them places, and then you can put that in, and that will make you a better person, a better karateka, a better martial artist. And that's what we should all be about, at least in my mind.
Yeah.
And what it is what your experience gives you is the ability to translate that metaphor. You can see something and translate it to your language, and that's what gives it value.
Yeah.
If you close off, anyway, that's, I think, so important to be able to do that.
Yeah. No, and Cameron, I think those words of wisdom there are perfect. I think, and I'm going to conclude with this. I am honored to have spoken to someone as humble as yourself, with the teachings that you possess, with the knowledge that you possess, and you was around all the greats at the time. They were great. I have just had a 2-hour conversation that felt like 5 minutes, and it's like I'm talking to an uncle of my whole life. That you're just so warm, so insightful, just so approachable. It's just so nice. And again, I said this last week, and I'm going to say it to you. When you're a low grade and you get the opportunity to speak to a high grade, it just feels like we're on equal terms. I've never felt inferior to you, and you've never tried to make yourself superior. And for that, I thank you, because to me, that is the art. And I thank you for your time today, and I think giving us a fantastic podcast.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. What a great honor for me as well. Like I said, following after Jeff Wybrow, who's one of my heroes, and training with you all. And Carlton, I think you're as close to Barry White that I've ever heard. I could sit here talking to you all day, because all I imagine
dear. Love you.
How many dates in the world exist because of Barry White's music?
Oh, believe a holy for kids. A holy for kids. Don't.
Yeah.
I don't know if the guys have got anything to say before you wrap it up, but I've said my bit. It's over to Darren and Wes to conclude.
I'm just going to take the stage for just a little thing. It's been truly amazing to hear all your stories, and in my opinion, I can't get enough of this. There's so much to learn from you. There's so much to talk about, and I think you and Jeff, who we had the first time. There's so much wisdom. There's so much like humbleness. You're a true inspiration, and I hope this will go for a part 2 as well, because it was amazing. I'm just really thankful for your time, the fact that you do take 2 hours and 15 minutes to talk with us, and it's it's crazy, but it's been lovely, and hopefully we can do this soon again, but also hope to get to have the honor to meet you again in person, because that was truly inspiring as well.
Well, good on you, Wes and Darren. You guys are doing a wonderful job, so keep it up. I can't even say that I could ever do anything technically as well as you guys. So we need guys like you getting out there and breaking down the barriers of Kyokushin. I think Kyokushin splintered, as we know, but it's only going to take the efforts of individuals like you guys to allow people to come back together and work with an open mind. Good on you.
Thank you.
Well said.
I mean, it's really humbling. I mean, you're a great person, a great person to talk with as well. You got such wisdom, such a very colourful and enthusiastic past. Your philosophy on the way that you look at things is very open-minded, which I think a lot of people could take a lot from. As Wes said, I'd really like to be at that camp in 2023. So I suggest that people start booking their places pretty quick, because it's probably going to be pretty busy, and wish you all the luck with this new book. As Cameron said, you can log on to the website and book it, order it. You know, it's going to be a great read, I'm sure.
And the website again is budokarate.com, right?
budokarate.com.
Yeah. I'm waiting for mine to come through. It's in the sewage works on the way, apparently, but you know, so I can't thank you enough for your time, your efforts, and your support for us has been fantastic, and we'd really like to.
Thanks for the shout outs you gave about us. Thanks for wearing the t-shirt. Thanks for being in our sessions. Thanks for everything you have done so far. Awesome. Before we log off, before we log off, thanks to all the participants again. Thanks to all the sponsors. Thanks to all the people who share us, who like us, who are there with us, because it is a strange time to be living in, and we're just trying to widen the view for this beautiful thing we do, karate, Kyokushin Kai karate, and you know.
You guys, good on you. Keep up the work, Carlton. Thank you for your leadership with the podcast too. I have to say you do a great job, so I really appreciate
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, he keeps us on track. He gives it a good direction, and you know, he does a lot of work at
least I know what you do.
Yeah, at least he knows what you do. Well,
thank you very much.
And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much.